saying. Well, thank you, Steve, dear. We welcome you to the End Mass Incarceration and the Death Penalty Subcommittee meeting of Advancing Human Rights of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And we ask you to speak to us a little bit about the state of the movement to abolish the death penalty. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Our cat Zoe has decided to join me, and Zoe is definitely against the death penalty. Say hello to Zoe. This was not planned. So first of all, it's an honor. Thank you for inviting me. And it's an honor to be part of anything that WILF does. I've always long admired WILF. And I was on the board of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty with Wendy Trafton. I don't think she's there anymore. Look, I'm going to set my phone a timer to 8 minutes. So Teresa asked me to first say some of the things that we did at People of Faith Against the Death Penalty. But I just want to say, I always want to start out with the statement of the death penalty being an expensive, error-prone, sexist, brutalizing relic of the Old South and America's unatoned racist past. That's what we're working against. And I've been working on the death penalty since I was an activist in college in the 80s. I was executive director from 1997 to 2015 of People of Faith Against the Death Penalty. And PFADP still sort of exists, and I'm still sort of the acting executive director. That's a long story. I've been on the board of Oregonians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty for the last 6 years, and I just stepped off that board. We started PFADP with about 600 contacts in the Raleigh area and ended up as a national group with over 50,000 contacts. And we focused on grassroots organizing. We won working with other organizations and attorneys and great advocates. We did the grassroots organizing that helped lead to 4 clemency decisions by governors, which I don't think any other state has had, that an executing state. And we got more than 2,000 resolutions from congregations, community groups, businesses, and 41 local governments, including Charlotte, and almost all the big cities in North Carolina. So there hasn't been an execution now in North Carolina for 15 years. North Carolina was the 5th most frequently executing state with the 5th largest death row. And it's essentially run by the Tea Party and Trump supporters, except for the governor. And anyway, we spent over 40 nights at vigils all night while they executed someone at 2 in the morning, standing there on the sidewalk with the family members crying. I'll never forget that. And that's why I stay in this movement. And what keeps me going in lots of ways is remembering those nights while someone was poisoned to death or gassed to death, a living, breathing, healthy human being. We organized the largest civil disobedience against the death penalty. Over 100 people blocked Central Prison one night. And ever since that night in 2003, people got arrested at executions. We became a national group. We were involved in Troy Davis's clemency campaign. We mobilized thousands of faith leaders. And we were involved in mobilizing faith communities in Maryland for the successful repeal campaign there. We also had a conference with people from 26 states at Ebenezer Baptist Church, Dr. King's Church in Atlanta, and at Emory University. So that's some of the stuff I've been involved with. Oh my God, that took a lot of time. The good news, state of the movement. The good news is that more states have abolished the death penalty or have a moratorium on executions. There are 23 states that have abolished the death penalty, and 3 have a moratorium, including here in Oregon and California and Pennsylvania. Virginia abolished the death penalty. That is mind-blowing. That is an incredible accomplishment. Other good news in a way in terms of organizing, there are 186 exonerations of innocent people, and we can utilize the group Witness to Innocence to help those exonerees bring their voice to this movement. There were only, I hate to say it this way, but only 9 executions this year. That's fewer than since 1983. There are 3 scheduled, 2 in Oklahoma, 1 in Alabama. And even if those souls are executed, that will still be no more executions in 1 year than since the mid-'80s. We have the rise of the movement for Black lives, and the death penalty can be seen as the dead end of America's structural racism, and work with that movement to work towards abolition. That's the good news. So there's some very great news, despite everything. But the bad news, there's significant, not so great news. The movement has diminished in some ways in terms of engagement. Part of that may be, part of that may be
okay, thanks. I'll talk to you soon.
Due to our own successes, as states abolish the death penalty, the movement in those states obviously is going to diminish. Teresa wanted me to be brutally honest. I mean, the movement was kind of co-opted is way too strong a word, and I know I'm being recorded, but about in the mid-2000s, some program officers from large foundations, some of which funded people of faith against the death penalty, and some death penalty attorneys really took over aspects of some of the movement in a top-down way in terms of strategizing that left a lot to be desired in terms of transparency and accountability to grassroots organizers who are actually mobilizing people. And their funding actually dried up anyway, and it left the movement in some ways definitely diminished. And I believed, we called our conference in 2010 in Atlanta the Kairos Conference. Kairos meaning that this is thinking that this is a special moment, a decade, in the last decade was a special opportune moment, the way the 1980s were in the movement for to end apartheid. There was the famous Kairos letter where people risked their lives signing this letter in the mid-'80s in South Africa. We don't have that here, but we viewed this time as this past decade as a really great opportunity to abolish the death penalty in the 2020s. And in fact, the big campaign was called the 2025 campaign. But then Trump won, and we lost the Supreme Court, and we're left with a diminished movement. And I know some of you are from California. There've been, massive efforts to win a statewide referendum in California. Here in Oregon, it's the same way. We have to abolish the death penalty through a vote the voters. And in Oregon, we could abolish it tomorrow in the legislature. We have the votes, they're right there, but we don't have the people votes. And in California, there have been millions of dollars spent and almost won, but didn't. So there's a lot of work left to do. I've got 3 minutes, less than a minute on my 8-minute thing. Anyway, I didn't know who was going to be on the call and where you all from, but I see California and 2 from North Carolina, and Georgia, Teresa. I would, in terms of what to do, my suggestion just in general was work with your statewide coalition, work with Death Penalty Focus. In some other states, there are groups, and there are volunteer groups that are people who are committed, but they may not have a great strategy in place. They may be just kind of some inertia or not knowing what to do. And in states where you have to have a referendum, like the 2 I'm in, Oregon and California, it's a huge effort. Here we go. I would suggest, in general, not focusing so much on clemency campaigns and stopping executions. That's of course very important, but that can really soak up time and effort, and it's not proactive. It can help in building the movement, but it also can keep us from doing proactive grassroots ground building work, and that's what we need to do for this movement. So I would end with go grassroots, be optimistic, and focus on building our movement. Hey, I did that in less than 10 minutes.
Well, thank you so much,
you.
Steve. You know, you have my utmost admiration for what we were able to do, and particularly the story you told me last night about Durham. I had no idea my good friend Bill Bell was not on board. But we have three people here from California, and I would like to give them the first opportunity for questions. So who has a question for Steve from California? Margot.
Yes. I'd like to thank you, Steve, for a very informative talk. And I'm wondering, what would you recommend? Because I was involved with the 2012 and 2016 referendum campaign with death penalty focus. How could we do better here?
Oh boy, that's a tough question, because you know, I'd have to have talked with someone in death penalty focus in the last 6 months or the last year, and I haven't. But they are, I mean, I would work with them because they're the group, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but if I had a little more time, I actually would have talked to them before talking to you guys. But that's a question that I would start with them and call them up and talk to them, unless you have a history and for some reason don't want to or something like that. But
no, I will.
Yeah, well, they've almost winning is still losing, but they have built up a lot and come very, very close, as you know. So it's, it is an effort worthy of your time. And I know I say that in 2021, where the climate is collapsing and we're still facing the threat of nuclear annihilation and all of that. But the death penalty is something that we can win. As you can see, we are winning. It is diminishing, even after Trump and through Trump and all of this.
Well,
I gotta say that what you're seeing behind me is my refrigerator on our front porch, which is pretty funny. And we're just switching out our old refrigerator. That's what you're seeing behind me. And Bill Bell, the mayor of Durham, may not be for the death penalty. I don't know. That was just he was not there when they passed the resolution and was surprised they did. And I don't know. I haven't talked to him.
Well, he is my good friend, and I spoke to him on October 26th. And so I will call him up because Durham is poised to get, I don't know if you remember Judge Elaine O'Neill, but she's been elected mayor of Durham, the first Black woman to be mayor of Durham. So Margot, would you mute yourself? We want to move on to the North Carolina folks. I see that Kim Porter and Samantha Turner and George Friday are all here from North Carolina. Did you hear the good news? I had no idea that North Carolina had a kind of moratorium on the death penalty. Is that what I heard you to say, Steve?
Oh, well, there hasn't been an execution. We have a de facto moratorium. There has not been an execution since August of 2006. Which is incredible. I can tell you not one organizer, including myself, would have thought that was happening back in 2006 when we were working so hard. We were fighting for a 2-year moratorium passed by the legislature, and we came within 3 votes, we think. It's complicated. Thanks to the Racial Justice Act, which threw a lot of wrenches in the system that the smart attorneys have been able to work with I want to be careful here if this is being recorded, but throw wrenches in the system in the courts, rightfully so. This is all not haphazard. There are no such things as legal technicalities. Those are rights. And so the courts have been able to be used to rightly stop executions and The governor of North Carolina is not eager to have executions, so we're hoping to let that sleeping dog continue to lie. And that's what's happening in North Carolina in a way.
Thank you, Steve. George, you have your hand raised.
Yes.
Did you have a question or comment?
I did, both. The comment is that the moratorium, which isn't official, but has, no one's been executed for 15 years in the state, but that is in many ways a result of having a Democrat as the governor. And it can be threatened to change if the administration changes in terms of the governor. The legislature is all Republican and they would love it to come back. But Steve, can you talk a little bit about the Racial Justice Act and what your thoughts are about that and how it may have helped or slowed things down?
Yeah, well, we used to say, just to keep in mind, that if you were on death row in the South, pray that you don't have a Democratic governor, because they were using the death penalty to look tough on crime. So it's not always been that way. Look at Jim Hunt. Easily, he executed so many people. Anyway, the Racial Justice Act was an act to allow for a review of a death sentence over whether race played a part in the decision of prosecutors to pursue it as a death penalty case or in the outcome of the case. And it was passed, and then it was vetoed, and then the veto, let me see, it was back and forth. It was vetoed. The veto was, oh man, I can't remember exactly. It's been over a decade now, but it was back and forth, back and forth. Finally, it is not currently in law. However, it did exist, and people on death row were able to file claims. Even white people sentenced to death row were able to file claims because the racism enters into the death penalty like everything else in so many different ways. Race of the victim is more important in terms of determining your likelihood to get a death sentence than your own race as a defendant. Juries value the lives of white people, I would argue, more than non-white, than Black people or BIPOC people. Anyway, so a lot of claims were able to be filed while the Racial Justice Act was in place in North Carolina. That is the core reason that and governors is, the Attorney General of North Carolina, Josh Stein, is from one of his father was one of the co-founders of the first integrated law firm in the state, civil rights attorney. The family is deeply involved in the anti-death penalty movement, and he's the Attorney General of North Carolina. So very grateful to his unwillingness, not very highly publicly, but he's clearly not pushing. So that's why I referred to letting the sleeping dog lie.
Well, thank you, Steve. George, I believe we had 3 people who did not introduce themselves. I don't recall that Kim Porter did. I know that Dee and Linda have not.
This is Kim Porter, I'm here.
Yeah, what we're doing, Kim, is people are saying their name, their branch, and their city. So could you tell Steve your name, your branch, and your city?
This is Kim Porter. I'm from the Triad area, and I live in Winston-Salem. And I'm glad to be here with y'all. And my question I put on the chat a few minutes ago was, what is the number one thing that we can do about the death penalty? And my other part of that is there something that we can do to make this moratorium an official one?
Kim, Steve spoke to that earlier, so we have to move on to the other introductions. Dee, would you give your name and your city?
Hi, sorry about that. I thought the meeting was in an hour, so I did it at a different time. But my name is Dee Murphy. I live in Minnesota, St. Cloud, Minnesota.
And Dee is in the Jane Addams branch, I believe she said.
Yes.
in the past. Thank you, Dee. We'll move to Linda Conti.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, your name, your branch, and your city.
Thank you. Linda Conti, the branch is the Westchester branch. We're just north of New York City, in New York State.
Has anyone else failed to introduce themselves yet? We
yes,
have.
I got in late, Teresa. This is Samantha Turner from the Triad branch. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh, thank you so much, Samantha. And we have Donna. Do you pronounce your last name Peel or Feel? Unmute yourself, Donna. We can't hear you.
Yes, it's peel, like banana peel.
Oh, okay. Well, Donna, you're in Massachusetts.
Yes, on Cape Cod.
Yes, I understand there's been no death penalty there for a while.
That's right.
What can you tell us about that?
I really don't know anything more than that. I'm glad there isn't. I'm here gathering, learning and listening and just trying to come up with the latest, just joining in and grateful to be on the call. Thank you.
Well, Steve, we're pretty much out of time on this, but I need you to say to me what you were saying to me last night about Massachusetts and how long they've been without the death penalty. Did you say something to me like that last night?
Well, I was saying that there's a group in Massachusetts that still, I think, still exists, even though the death penalty, Massachusetts Coalition Against the Death Penalty or something like that, that even though Massachusetts hasn't had the death penalty in a long time, like since the 1800s, Michigan hasn't had it long. Michigan was the first English-speaking government in the world to abolish the death penalty. And a friend of mine who's passed away was also got it passed in the legislature to change the state constitution of Michigan to take it out, which is what we'd have to do here in Oregon, change the constitution. It's in the constitution. So the Supreme Court of Oregon can't call it unconstitutional because it's actually in the constitution. But anyway, so there are states that haven't had the death penalty in over 100 years. There are great reasons. I think this is what you're getting at. There's great reasons for optimism on this issue. There's not a lot of corporate money behind the death penalty. We should be optimistic. The question is, how many people are we going to allow to be executed and killed? How many poor people, how many people who killed white people are we going to be allowed to be killed before we stop this?
Well, thank you, Steve. You're welcome to stay for the remainder of our meeting. We have another agenda item, the first annual Fannie Lou Hamer Branch Human Rights Conference, which is coming up on December 11th. And when I talked to Gail Ferris on Messenger today, she suggested Patrick O'Neill, who's with the Catholic Workers. And I would appreciate you saying something about the role of the Catholic workers historically and currently in abolishing the death penalty throughout the United States.
The Catholic Worker Movement, co-founded by Dorothy Day and Pierre Morin, started in the 1920s and 30s with communities, about 100 communities across the country. So there are people rooted in the community. They're doing works of mercy, soup kitchens, housing people, but also engaging in the community on peace and justice issues, including the death penalty. When there's an execution, it's often Catholic workers who will be there vigiling and working against it. Patrick O'Neill is one of my closest friends, and he just got out of prison. He finishes his sentence this Friday for his involvement in the Kings Bay Plowshares, which was an anti-nuclear action at Kings Bay Naval Base, where there are the Trident submarines are based in Georgia. And 7 people, most of them over 60 years old, were sentenced to prison sentences of over a year or two, and one spent three years in prison and jail, county jails in Georgia. Steve Kelly. Anyway, the Catholic workers have been very involved in the abolition movement. Patrick O'Neill's personally been very, very involved in the abolition movement. Yeah. And I want to just say thanks for having me. It's an honor. You know, I know some of you folks. We're not only Facebook friends, whatever that means, but it's nice to see and hear the names of some old friends. And it's an honor to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, Teresa.
Oh, well, thank you, Steve. And I'm not going to let you go. You'll hear from me from time to time, because the question I asked Gail was, is Patrick out? Because I knew he had been in. So it's good to know that he's getting out this week. So he possibly will be
out. He is out. He was in a halfway house, and now he's with a electronic monitor at home, and that comes off on Friday. But then he has 3 years probation.
Oh, well, you know, he's been behind the walls many times for many reasons. It's amazing with the big family he has, how often he does that. So thank you. Everybody give an applause and thanks to Steve. You can unmute yourself so he can hear you. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
I'll be back in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. You're great.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. We'll be back in touch, Steve.
Alrighty.
Thank you. Members of WILF and the End Mass Incarceration and the Death Penalty Subcommittee, we have only one other item on the agenda for this meeting, because I wanted to make sure that we had time for Steve, and you can see how knowledgeable he is. But I did want to give an update. Yes, the recording will most certainly be available. George is an expert at handling the recording, so I asked her to be the host to record it, so that immediately, pretty much after this meeting, it can be posted to the WILF branches list. So if you're a contact on the WILF branches list, you will receive it. If you're in this meeting, you will receive the link. George can correct me if I'm wrong, because all of you in this meeting can get to forward it to other places and friends, you know. And I would appreciate, Donna, if you would make sure that, is it Elenita? Oh, unmute yourself, Donna.
Yes, Elenita Musniz.
Yes, if you could make sure she gets a recording, since she wasn't able to be here.
Thank you. Yeah.
So George, could you confirm that that can be done in terms of the recording?
Yes, I can send a link to everyone on this Zoom and to the branches list. Probably.
Well, thank you.
Yes, within an hour of the meeting ending.
Thank you so much, George. Well, I do want to tell a little about the first annual Fannie Lou Hamer Branch Human Rights Conference. It is a Fannie Lou Hamer Branch conference that we're inviting people to over a wide range of social justice organizations, including all of the members of the United for Peace and Justice Coalition, where George works, as well as asking World Beyond War to send out to their US contacts, only the US contacts, to invite them, because we want to make sure that we have 300 plus people registered. My experience with Zoom and World Beyond War has said this often, that about a third of the people who register for Zooms lately actually show up. And we've set a maximum number for the conference of 160. So when we hit that number, somewhere within the first 10 minutes, the doors will be closed. So we're urging all of the WILF members to make sure you're on time. We'll actually open the doors around 10 of the hour. So 10 of 10 and 10 of 1, we will open the doors to the conference. And at 10 after, whether we have 160 or not, the doors will be closed. We ran into a problem around the 5 topics we were using. We lost the death penalty representation for the conference. I won't go into the details why, but what we decided to do is add the death penalty to the end mass incarceration breakout. So end mass incarceration and the death penalty, which is the name of this subcommittee, will actually have a presentation on the death penalty, and it will probably be from Patrick O'Neill. I think he'd be willing to do it. He's a dear friend from North Carolina, and another dear friend recommended him, and so I think he will do it for us. Walisha Wilson and I, who is the other, who is the facilitator actually of the end mass incarceration, she's very familiar with death penalty issues as well. So she will facilitate that discussion in the first 40 minutes and in the second 30 minutes. And she and I will talk today a little after 5 p.m. so that she knows now that the death penalty has been added to that. The reason I wanted Steve to be here today so that we could see as a committee, thanks to Margot recommending that we add the death penalty to our, what was just in mass incarceration, we can move forward and hold on to that despite some snafus in the topic. So we'll have 4, which is going to help a lot. We're only going to have 4 speakers on the plenary. We will not have a death penalty speaker on the plenary. We will simply have a speaker on ending mass incarceration, a speaker on immigration justice, a speaker on the TPNW, and a speaker on the UN decade for people of African descent / reparations. And so I know that I think I see Darian is putting things in the chat, and oh, well, it is the Fannie Lou Hamer branch, Human Rights Conference, Darian. So we have made that decision about how we're restricting it because the conference is an action-oriented conference. It is not a webinar. So when we meet on Wednesday, Darian, all the facilitators and speakers who are going to be speaking and facilitating at the conference have a meeting on Wednesday with Ellen Thomas and with Ellen Schwartz. So we will make sure that this is all clear to all the members of the branches, because only 33 people have registered so far, and a significant number of them are not members of branches. So if you haven't registered, it would be good for you to register for the conference if you're interested in attending. That's pretty much all I wanted to say about that. I don't see any hands up. That's not a hand, but does anyone have any questions? If you could raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask the questions. There are no restrictions on anybody speaking. So you're unmuted, Joan. So did you have a question?
Oh, I'm very sorry. I forgot to mute myself at some point after I clapped, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just glad to know that the reason for cutting it off is because it's because of the focus on action and getting everybody focused on doing things rather than a webinar of speakers. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad that you appreciate that because
wasn't it all clear to me?
Well,
Thank
the
you.
opening, let me just explain this part, Joan. The opening plenary will start promptly at the top of the hour with me welcoming people. And then the speakers in the order that I name will have 10 minutes. They have been cut down to 7 minutes because we had 5. And I know that Cheryl Spencer has a lot to say. And so I'm glad she will know that she will have the whole 10 minutes. And Akinyele Umoja, professor at Georgia State University, will have his 10 minutes. And the executive pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, the Martin Luther King Church, in the conference that Steve mentioned, which was in 2019, I was actually there. It was huge. And Pastor John Vaughn will talk about the next conference, which I think is coming up next year. And then, of course, we have Azadeh Shashahani, who is speaking on immigration justice, and she can only stay for that panel. So she will leave the meeting shortly after the plenary session ends. And Samantha Turner and Adrian Bernal have been asked to be facilitators of the immigration justice. And as Adrian says, he's Chicano and I know him well. He's actually on the board of the Southern Anti-Racism Network. So I know what he can do in terms of talking about immigration justice and facilitating the conversation towards action. I thought I saw Linda Conti write something in the chat. Linda, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Linda Conti, okay.
I just asked if you would put details on the upcoming conference and how we register.
George, you have the link. Can you put it in the chat for Linda to register now? George, are you able to do that, George?
Yes.
Okay, George will put the link in the chat, and anyone who hasn't registered should register. Most of the speakers and facilitators have registered. We have about 17 speakers and facilitators. In the TPNW breakout, we have 2 women of color who will join Cheryl Spencer in that breakout. And one of the women is Rebecca Irby, who was referred to me by Cynthia Lazaroff, who is now my friend on Facebook. And many of you probably know her because she's conducted many of these conferences about nuclear proliferation. And so glad to have her for a friend. She also recommended Selena, and I'm spacing on Selena's last name, but they will both be with Cheryl Spencer. And Selena just got back this weekend from the COP26. So she's gonna have a bit to say at our meeting on Wednesday when all the facilitators and speakers come together on Wednesday. Selena will give us a little 10-minute talk about what happened at COP26 from the perspective of someone who's from the Marshall Islands. So if there are no other questions about the conference, you'll be hearing more details as we go on, but it's pretty tightly planned by the Fannie Lou Hamer branch. And we are giving honoraria to speakers who are not WILF members. So thanks to the grant from Wilf US, the mini grant. We have $1,500 sitting in the bank. And so we will start paying that out to the speakers who are not Wilf members. And so I count that we have about $1,000 that we're going to be paying out to facilitators only, because there are 10 facilitators in the workshops that we have, is what I remember. I see George has put the link in the chat for people to register. So for the last few minutes, we want to open it up, but the one task we need to do before we close the meeting is choose the date for the next meeting, which I would recommend that we choose the date after the conference, so that we can sum up the conference from our point of view. That's just my proposal. But we have about 5 minutes or so for any open comments from anyone about anything associated with ending mass incarceration and the death penalty. I would say going once, going twice, going 3 times. Are there any comments about anything that's been said? Well, hearing none, can we look at our calendars for a date in December after December 11th, unless someone has a different proposal? I want us to meet after the 11th because the conference is actually set up, quite frankly, to cover the areas of advancing human rights. So we got immigration justice, we got ending mass incarceration and the death penalty, and we have the UN decade. These are all subcommittees inside of advancing human rights. So are people looking at their calendars? So the 11th is on a Saturday, and I would say we have tended towards Mondays. And so the Monday after the conference is the 13th. So Joan, could you speak? You look to be slapping your head, Joan. Unmute yourself. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was just thinking about how exhausted everybody's going to be after the, but it's about Saturday. I'm sorry, the conference is on Saturday. So yes. We have a whole day to recover and plan ahead and get ready to talk about what to do next. Sorry.
Well, Joan, you're speaking for yourself, but I run on adrenaline most of the time, and I'll be wired for sound and ready to go on the 13th. So do people have any objections to meeting at 1 p.m. on Mondays? Are not good for me, is what Kim Porter is saying. So Kim Porter, please make another suggestion. I have Tuesday the 14th completely open, but George, I believe Tuesday the 14th is actually Richard Paddock's birthday, who is a longtime Wilf member in the Triangle, and we had planned to come to the Triangle for that. And Kim is saying she'll make it work. So on December 13th at 1 p.m. Will be our next meeting. Is there anything else to come before the subcommittee before we adjourn? And so what are you saying, Dee? You're open to that? You're open to December 13th? That sounds great. So December 13th at 1 p.m. it is, and I'm still the convener. We know that on November 29th, when the full committee meets, it's my hope, and it's the hope of George and others, that we will settle the question of the clusters and the structure of Wilf, and actually have an election. I am not opposed to voting, but I'd like for us to reach consensus if possible, since Samantha Turner and I both have agreed to serve as co-chairs of Advancing Human Rights. And we see no reason to wait until January to do that. So our plan is to ask the full committee to support us as the new co-chairs. And that means, friends, that we need to find a new convener for ending mass incarceration and the death penalty if I move into that position. But that's something we can talk about when the clusters meet and at the meeting on November 29th. So I think we're ending a little bit early. You know how much I love the 1 hour meeting, George, and we don't like to waste people's time. So I'll ask once again, any closing words from anyone?
Yes, Teresa, I was confused. I just thought that we hadn't really settled on there at you being you and Samantha, because I do know that the other people had expressed interest, and I, as a new person, would kind of like to hear everybody's, what they would bring. No disrespect to you and your vast experience, but I thought maybe it was going to be a little bit more of a selection process, because I've seen a few people express interest in the chat, not only at this meeting, but at previous meetings. And I know that we kind of rush sometimes because we're trying to get everything in the time, but I definitely wanted to make sure that all voices of people who were interested were heard, and especially not put so much on your plate as you are the head of so many things that are already going on. But I just wanted to drop that in the meeting before we left.
Well, I appreciate that, Ashley, but you have no idea what's really on my plate. I work with lots of people, and I carry a light load because I don't work alone. And so here in Columbus, I work with a large collaboration of people who call me Mama Teresa, and they make sure that Mama Teresa gets her rest. But I agree with you on the democratic process. Because I'm not for rushing anything. So if there's any unreadiness on November 29th with the nominations of Samantha Turner and Teresa Elamine, we will open the floor for other nominations. And George Friday is facilitating the meeting, and she would be able to handle that well. I think I would do a good job, Ashley, based on me having been involved with Will since the 80s. I know you're new to Will, but I've been involved with Will for a very long time. So Philip Cole, we do have a little time. So Philip Cole and then Joan Goddard. Philip Cole.
Yeah, this, co-chair appointments for the HR, is this going to be temporary until January, or will it be rotating co-chairs, or are we going to see a slate of people who also may be willing to step up to the plate and then reach a consensus on that on the 29th?
Well, that's exactly what's planned. I just kind of nominated myself early on, but it's not a fait accompli. We will have a democratic discussion, and quite frankly, I think I would do a good job, but if I'm not accepted, I don't fight to volunteer. It's not a paid position. So if somebody else wants to do it and don't want me to do it, I'll give it up freely. Joan, you're next.
I think the idea could be that what we want to do is to find somebody to do the coordinating work that I've been doing, and believe me, it's not much fun, and maybe some leadership also. So but the coordinating work really needs to be done for the subcommittees who do the actual work, and on a lot of different subjects. Well, not a lot, several. So I think the idea that we get settled about the clusters, we have the clusters get together, and then we see what the situation is as far as when it would make sense if there are people who are willing to do the work of the coordination, and maybe call it a coordinator instead of a chair. Maybe that maybe that helps to explain the difference, although obviously that role could change. Thank you.
Adopting of the chart, you know, this history of the 3 Black women who didn't last really, I don't think, 3 months. That is why it's significant that we have what every other issue committee has. They have co-chairs. The Middle East Peace and Justice Action Committee has co-chairs. The Disarm in Wars has co-chairs. All of the other committees, so we should not be treated less than. That is a usual and customary structure, which is why I offered it, because I understand that that is in general the way issue committees are organized. Do you need to lower your hand, Joan, or did you have more?
Oh, sorry, no, that's a good point. They don't have strong subcommittees on a lot of different subjects, but we can talk about this later. We don't need to talk about it now because we will talk about 11 o'clock here.
We will talk about it on the 29th. So if all hearts and minds are clear, we will end the meeting. And George, you're the host, so you're the one who has to end the meeting. But George, make sure you save the chat so we can have that to distribute to everyone as well. Love you so much, George. I am so low tech and George is so high tech. So thank you so much, George. Please save the chat and the recording so we can get that information out to everyone.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
And I'm looking a mess, but I will turn on my camera for a minute to wave. So if everybody wants to turn on their cameras and wave, that would be nice so we can see everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you, George.
Day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, George.